My name is Emily, and I will never forget the Christmas night when my own father looked me in the eye and told me I was nothing more than a leech. His words cut deeper than any knife, sharper than any rejection I've ever faced. We were all gathered around the long oak dining table in the house I grew up in. The smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon filled the air, the twinkling lights from the Christmas tree spilling into the room, making everything look warm and perfect. But perfection can shatter in a second, and that night it did. I had been back at my parents' place for a few months. Life hadn't gone the way I planned. My fiancé and I had broken up after 3 years together. He left me for someone else, and along with him went the apartment we shared. My job at the marketing firm had downsized, and I was one of the unlucky ones they let go just before the holidays. I thought coming home would mean comfort, a soft place to land while I put the pieces back together. I thought wrong. At dinner, the conversation was light at first. Holiday plans, cousins talking about their new jobs, my younger brother bragging about the down payment he'd made on his new house. I tried to smile, nod, and blend in. But every time I opened my mouth, it felt like my father's eyes were on me, cold, judging, weighing every word. Finally, after dessert plates were cleared and wine glasses refilled, my father stood up. His chair scraped against the wood floor, loud enough to silence the room. He looked straight at me and said, "You're a leech. You can't stay here anymore." At first, I thought I had misheard him. The room went silent, every pair of eyes turning toward me. My heart dropped into my stomach, and I felt the heat rush to my face. "Dad, what are you talking about?" I managed to whisper, my voice shaking. He didn't hesitate. "You've been living here rent-free, eating our food, sleeping under our roof, and doing nothing. Your brother has a house, your sister has a career, and you—" He pointed at me, the way a judge points at the accused. "You're nothing but a burden. A leech. I won't let it go on any longer." I could hear my mother gasp, but she didn't say a word. My brother smirked into his wine glass, and my sister just stared at her lap. Not one person came to my defense. The words hit me like a slap across the face. Leech. Burden. Nothing. I wanted to stand up for myself, to shout that I had been through heartbreak, job loss, the collapse of everything I'd built. But instead, I just sat there, frozen, humiliated in front of my entire family. I swallowed the lump in my throat and tried to hold back tears. "I didn't want any of this," I said quietly. I didn't choose to fail. "I'm trying, Dad." But he only shook his head, his face red with anger. "Trying doesn't put food on the table. Trying doesn't pay bills. You're 30 years old, Emily. It's time you learned how to stand on your own 2 feet. The room was still silent, except for the clinking of a fork someone nervously set down. My mother reached out as if she wanted to touch my hand, but then she pulled back, folding her hands in her lap instead. Something inside me broke that night. The girl who had run home to her family for comfort was gone. In her place was someone who had been forced to see the truth. I was alone. I stood up slowly, my chair legs screeching against the floor. My voice was steadier than I expected when I said, "Fine, if I'm such a leech, I'll go." I could see my father's expression soften for just a moment, but pride hardened it again. He didn't stop me. No one did. I walked upstairs, packed my suitcase in silence, and carried it down past the twinkling Christmas tree. The lights blinked cheerfully, mocking me, as if Christmas didn't care about broken families or shattered hearts. When I opened the door, the cold winter air rushed in. I stepped outside with nothing but my bag and my pride, and behind me, I could hear the sound of laughter picking back up at the table, as if I had never been there at all. I didn't cry in the driveway. I thought I would, but the cold kept the tears pinned behind my eyes. The wind bit at my cheeks and made me feel awake in a way I hadn't felt in weeks. I dragged my suitcase through the slush to the curb and stood there for a second like a traveler who'd missed her train. My phone was warm in my palm, buzzing with nothing. I wanted to text someone and say the line I had never said out loud. My father called me a leech at Christmas dinner and kicked me out. The sentence felt like a dare. I texted Maya. If I had a sister by soul, it would be her. I typed and erased and typed again until all I sent was, "Are you awake?" She wrote back immediately, like friends do when you need them. Always. "What's wrong?" I stared at those words and felt the courage to tell the truth. "Dad kicked me out." She replied with the 3 dots so fast it made me laugh. "I'm coming." 15 minutes. "Don't move." While I waited, I leaned my suitcase against the mailbox and looked up at the lit windows of my parents' house. I could see silhouettes moving. someone gesturing near the tree, and I imagined the conversation inside pivoting back to safe topics. My mother would tidy the table as if picking up plates could erase what had been said. My brother would say something about interest rates. My sister would pretend her fork was the most interesting object in the world. That is how we do harm sometimes. Not with cruelty, but with normalcy rushing in to cover it up. Maya's little hatchback swung into the driveway like a rescue boat. She jumped out without turning off the engine and folded me into a hug that smelled like rosemary and hair dye. "Tell me," she said against my shoulder, but I couldn't speak yet. So she simply opened the trunk and heaved my suitcase in and slammed it with the kind of solidarity that sounds like punctuation. She drove us away from the house without looking back. I did look back, though. I let my eyes hold the image of the house like a photo I could study later without feeling it. We didn't talk until we reached her apartment, the small second-floor walk-up with the string of paper stars in the window. When the door closed behind us, she set a mug of cocoa in my hands and waited. She has this way of listening that makes you tell the truth even when you want to make it pretty. I told her what he said. I told her the exact words because words matter. "You're a leech? You can't stay here anymore?" I said them out loud and felt them thud on the floor between us like something heavy we could both see. Maya's eyes flamed. "He said that to you? At Christmas?" I nodded, and the nod felt like signing a document. She didn't say it'll be okay. She didn't say he didn't mean it. She said, "Do you want to sleep or do you want to plan?" I wanted to plan. I didn't know what the plan was yet, but saying the word made my spine straighten. We spread my life on her kitchen table. My resume, the rejection emails, the broken bracelet from the night I found out about my ex, a few business cards, a sketchbook I'd been carrying around and not using. The cocoa went cold. Maya handed me a pen. "What's your next right thing?" she asked. She always asks that when things feel too big. The next right thing was simple. Find a place to sleep that wasn't a friend's couch and get a job that wasn't pretending to wait. "I can stay here a few nights," I said, "but I need to move forward. Fast." We pulled up listings for studio apartments that wouldn't ask for organs as a deposit. The screens were full of dingy carpets and suspicious stains, but the act of scrolling felt like prayer. We circled 2 that were remotely possible and sent messages. Then we wrote another list. Places I could apply tomorrow. I didn't limit myself to marketing. Pride is expensive. I would pour coffee. I would stock shelves. I would answer phones with a smile the size of a billboard. But I also wrote a separate list. A quiet one, in the corner of the page. My skills that didn't disappear just because a company cut costs. I knew branding. I could write copy. I understood how to make a dead social media page hum. Those things were still mine. When the lists were done, we made a bed on her sofa with a quilt that looked like someone had stitched a sunset into it. Maya kissed my forehead like a big sister and turned off the lamp. In the dark, I listened to the little noises of her apartment. The fridge humming, the radiator clanking like a friendly ghost, and told myself I would remember this too, the place where I paused before leaping. I woke before the sun, a new reflex born out of the urgency to prove a man wrong. The city was quiet and pink at the edges. I left Maya a note and slipped out with my coat zipped to my throat. The air had that bright cold that makes you believe beginnings are possible. I walked until a neon open sign blinked me into a small diner I'd never noticed. The woman behind the counter had a smile that said she'd seen every kind of morning. "You hiring?" I asked, standing straighter than I felt. She pointed at a handwritten sign taped to the register. "Help wanted mornings." "You any good with people?" she asked. "I'm better than average," I said, and for the first time in weeks, I believed myself. She gave me an apron and told me to shadow a girl named Tiff for the day. By the time the sun was up, I had learned how to carry 3 plates on my forearm and how to call out orders in a voice that cut through clatter. People tipped me enough to prove I existed. On my break, I checked my phone. 2 replies to the apartment inquiries. One was already taken. The other said to come by at 5. I texted Maya the time and scrolled through my emails. A new message from a woman who owned a flower shop a few blocks away. Saw your post about helping small businesses with branding. Do you do seasonal campaigns? My heart stuttered. Last week, when I was trying not to drown, I had posted a simple offer on a community board online. Affordable branding help for local shops. Need holiday posts? Window copy? Quick websites? Email me. I hit reply with fingers that trembled. Yes, I do. I can stop by today after my shift. I attached a 1-page portfolio I had made at 2 in the morning a few days ago, not expecting it to do anything but make me feel like a person again. After my shift, I walked to the flower shop. It smelled like hope does, green and damp and alive. The owner, a woman in her 50s with hands that looked like they'd held every kind of stem, greeted me with eyes that calculated and welcomed at once. "I'm Lila," she said. "If you can make people come in here the way you walked in, like they were always meant to, then you've got the job." She showed me her Instagram, a grid of beautiful bouquets that nobody was seeing. I talked about color stories and captions that tell you what your own hands could hold. I offered a simple package: 2 weeks of daily posts, a window sign, a flyer for the neighborhood. She named a number that made me blink. It wasn't big, but it was money for my brain, not just my arms. I said yes and set a start time for tomorrow morning before my diner shift. When I left, I held a tulip she insisted I take. It looked obscene and perfect, like the first yes after 100 no's. At 5, I met the landlord at the building with the peeling blue door. The studio was the size of a generous rug. The window faced a brick wall that made its own weather. There was a tiny kitchenette that looked like a toy, and a closet that tried. But there was a latch on the window that worked, and a door that locked, and room for my suitcase. The landlord told me the deposit and the rent, and I did math in my head that felt like juggling knives. It could work if I worked. "I'll take it," I said, and he looked relieved, as if he had been preparing to sell the idea harder. I signed my name like a beginning. That night, back at Maya's, we ate soup on the couch and grinned at each other like we had robbed a bank. "You're not a leech," she said into her bowl, as if the soup needed to hear it too. I laughed, but the laugh had a line of steel in it. "I know," I said. And I did know, in a way I hadn't known 24 hours ago. Knowing didn't erase the hurt. It just gave the hurt a place to stand. Days found their rhythm. Mornings at the diner, afternoons at the flower shop computer with my sleeves rolled and my hair in a pencil bun, evenings packing my few things into boxes, nights in the studio with a radio playing softly and a notebook open to lists that now had check marks. Lila's page began to sprout comments. People tagged friends and said, "Look at this one, can we go?" We printed the flyer on a bright cardstock, and I watched strangers take pictures of it for their group chats. The first Saturday after the new post went up, the shop was so crowded that Lila kept refilling buckets like she was pouring water into a leaky boat. She paid me in cash and flowers, and I filled a chipped mug in my window with stems that tried their best to be a view. On my second week at the diner, a familiar voice slid into a corner booth and ordered coffee without looking up. It was my brother, Ethan. He wore the jacket that said, "I make more than you." I thought about ignoring him. I thought about spilling water on his lap. Instead, I walked over and set the mug down carefully, as if it were a tiny stage. "How's the house?" I asked. He looked up and blinked like he'd been caught between versions of me. "It's fine," he said. "Dad's been—" I did not know. I did not ask. He cleared his throat. "Are you okay?" The question sounded borrowed. "I'm good," I said, and realized it was true. "Do you want the cranberry pancakes or the thing you pretend is healthy?" He chose the pancakes, and I wrote it down with a flourish that made him smile against his will. When he left, he tipped me more than our childhood would have predicted. On the check, he'd written, "Sorry I didn't say anything." I folded the paper small and put it in my pocket like a pebble I could rub when I needed reminding that people are not single events. The small branding jobs multiplied like rabbits. After the flower shop, a bookstore messaged me. Then a yoga studio, then a bakery with a cinnamon roll so famous it was already an influencer without knowing it. I made a simple website and put my packages there with names that sounded like warm places. My phone buzzed with requests, enough that I could reduce my hours at the diner and still pay rent. On my first night off, I sat on the floor of my studio, ate bakery bread with my fingers, and cried in the way that feels like water finishing a job the world started. A month later, my mother texted me. "Can I see you?" I stared at the screen like it might change if I waited. I typed yes and sent an address. She showed up at the diner, sitting at a table in her best coat, like she was auditioning for the role of mother in a play about careful women. I brought her tea and sat opposite her for 5 minutes on my break. She took my hand like she used to when I was small and nervous about the dentist. "I'm sorry," she said. "Your father, he was wrong to say that. He's stubborn and proud and scared, and he said a cruel thing because he mistook his fear for your failure." I wanted to cross my arms and ask why she hadn't spoken then. I also wanted to put my head in her lap and let her smooth my hair. I did neither. I said, "I'm okay," because it was both true and insufficient. She glanced around the diner, at the coffee ring on the table, at my name tag. "Are you—" She started, then stopped as if the sentence was a cliff. "I'm building something," I said. I want you to see it when it's bigger than a day. She nodded and slipped a small envelope across the table. Your grandmother's ring, she said. I took it off before dinner that night. I couldn't watch it on your finger while he... She stopped. I saved it for you. For when you want it. I didn't open the envelope. I just held it like a promise that didn't require anyone else's permission. When she left, she hugged me too long for a diner and I let her. Spring crept in while I wasn't watching. The brick wall outside my window grew a patch of moss that looked like it was telling a story. My studio got a second chair. My website got a testimonials page that made me blush when I read it alone. I saved money and bought a table from a thrift store and painted it the color of a quiet lake. I stopped checking my father's social media, stopped standing outside the old house like a thief of my own memories. I built muscles in my hands and in my heart. I didn't plan the revenge. That's what I tell myself. But sometimes justice is just the world asking you if you'd like to hold the mirror or if you'd prefer it mounted on the wall. Layla called me one afternoon with a voice that sounded like a secret. We're doing a neighborhood fair, she said. Everyone's bringing a booth. Music, food, vendors, the whole street. You have to have a table. Show people what you do. Charge for mini consultations. Dress cute, I laughed. That last instruction is the most important, I said. She didn't disagree. On the day of the fair, the street bloomed with tents and children and dogs that thought they were people. I set up my table with a simple sign. Emily Rivers. Branding and copy. I laid out before and afters from the flower shop and the bakery, a stack of business cards thick enough to feel like a future. People stopped and asked questions, and I answered them with the kind of confidence that comes only from doing the thing until it is part of your skin. A teenage girl told me she liked my earrings. A man with a hardware store asked if I could make hammers look sexy. Watch me, I said, and he laughed so loud his wife rolled her eyes. Around noon, Maya arrived with 2 coffees and a grin so wide I could see the day reflected in her teeth. You're a hit, she said, dropping a kiss on my cheek and handing me a pastry that tasted like celebration. We were mid-laugh when I saw him. My father, hands in the pockets of a jacket I had once bought him for Father's Day, walking down the center of the street like a man who owned it. My breath did a small, ridiculous thing. He saw me. Our eyes caught like 2 animals meeting at the river. He looked older than he had at Christmas. Or maybe I just had more angles to see him from now. He didn't approach the table at first. He circled, stopping at the flower shop where Lila made him smell a peony, as if it was a joke only they could hear. He bought a bag of cookies from the bakery and nodded at nothing. Then he came over, not looking left or right, the way men do when they are telling themselves they are brave. He stood in front of my sign and read my name like it was news. Emily, he said, as if trying on the sound to see if it still fit. I waited. The silence between us felt less like a weapon and more like a room we both wanted to furnish carefully. I saw the flyers, he said finally, holding one from the hardware store in his hand. And the flower shop changes. He cleared his throat. It looks good. The word good sounded like a mountain to him. I realized then that he hadn't come to scold or to order me back into the box he kept for me. He had come to see if the box was even still there. It wasn't. Thank you, I said. I didn't offer softness he hadn't earned. I didn't swing the door wide. I just let the light in. He set the bag of cookies on my table like an offering. I shouldn't have said what I said, he murmured. Your mother has told me that 100 times. I knew it the second it left my mouth, but pride kept the door closed. He looked up at me, and in his eyes, I saw the boy he had been before life taught him to measure love in bills and productivity. I'm sorry, Em. He had called me Em when I was small and fearless. The name loosened something tied tight inside my chest. I left, I said softly. I didn't want to have to prove I deserved to exist at the table where I learned to use a fork. He flinched, just a small tightening at the jaw, but it was something. I know, he said. I know. He glanced around at the people, at the booth with my name. You built this. It wasn't a question. Yes, I said. We both looked at the sign like it was a flag we could agree not to trample. He opened his mouth and closed it again. A man choosing the right tool from a drawer. What do you charge to fix a voice? He asked finally, attempting something like humor. I blinked, confused. He pointed at his chest. My business, he said, and I remembered the small construction company he had nursed like a third child. Our website reads like a manual. We need people to understand what we do for them. He was asking me for help. He was asking me for my skill. The very thing he'd once told me wasn't real enough to pay for a roof. Maya, who had been standing quiet, squeezed my hand under the table. I felt my mouth curve because life is nothing if not inventive. "I have packages," I said, and slid a sheet across the table like a dealer. He studied it like it was a map. He didn't wince at the prices. He didn't bargain me down to prove he could. He looked up and held out his hand. "Hire me then," I said with a smile that was both salt and sugar. He took my hand, and his grip was familiar and new at once. He left with a folder under his arm and the cookies still on my table. "I didn't pick them up," I breathed. Maya leaned in and whispered, "That looked like power wearing a dress." I laughed until I had to wipe my eyes, and then I sold another package to a woman who made candles that smelled like memories. That night, I walked into my studio and placed the cookie bag on the lake-colored table. I opened the envelope my mother had given me at the diner and slid the ring onto the table beside them. It caught the dying light and made its own small star. I wasn't ready to wear it. I wasn't ready to hand it back. I was ready, though, to call my mother and tell her about the day in a voice that didn't shake. Before I slept, I wrote a letter. Not the kind you mail. The kind you tuck into a drawer and read when the world tries to rename you. It began like this. I am not a leech. I am a builder. I am a woman who can carry plates and portfolios, who can pour coffee and pour words into shapes that make strangers stop and say, "I want that." I can leave a house and not leave myself. I can stand at a table with my name on it and sell a thing that didn't exist yesterday. I can forgive slowly without forgetting fast. I can choose my family out of the people who show up in cars at midnight and the people who show up at booths at noon with their hats in their hands. I folded the letter and put it in the drawer with the ring. When sleep came, it was heavy and kind. The radiator hissed like an old woman telling a story with too many good parts. Outside, the brick wall kept its own counsel. Inside, I dreamed not of Christmas, but of summers not yet lived. Of fairs on streets where my table got longer every year until it was big enough for anyone who had ever tried to make me small.